Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody. Welcome. We will commence the meeting, New London Housing Commission, on Tuesday, August 12th at 2:30, just a few minutes late. First of all, on a discussion of governance, Steve and Tom, would you serve as full members if you would, please? Should we need to have a vote? Thank you for your attendance. We are also, as a reminder, looking for new members of the commission. If you end up talking to people from time to time and they're passionate in their speech with you about the topic, you could just gently roll in at the end of the discussion. Oh, by the way, if you really want to help make a difference, we'd love to have you come talk with us further. So please get that word out because we have some exciting work to do this fall. And we'll discuss most of what we have to accomplish and how to do it today. I sent you an email with lots of attachments. I try to give you as much time as possible to review them, and I also try not to send you too many emails because then it's easy just to say, oh dear, that's Peter again, and I'll get to it eventually. So I hope you can appreciate how I do try to assemble those materials in one place and make it concise. We won't be going through all of those items today, but we will use many of them as references. I have some copies I can hand out to you, or you can also, when you get home, print them out again from your computers. First, I thought we'd talk about the existing state legislative mandates that we have. They are voluminous, they are strict, detailed, and one of them in particular regarding the ADU has some revisions that the town will have to adopt. And in fact, I don't know how this works, but it's already in effect. So even though our ordinances don't say that, I'll leave it up to our officials to figure out if somebody comes and says, I want a detached ADU, and you have to give me a building permit for it, how we manage that. But that's not our scope. We're just advisory. So let's start, if you would, please. If you have the revised law on accessory dwelling unit guideline that came out from New Hampshire Municipal Association. Do you have copies? I have a couple of extras here if you need them. We're not going to go through this verbatim, but we will refer to these things. That's that one. Yep. Do you have? Everybody have theirs? Okay. Anybody need? You all set? You need one? Yep. There you go.
Do you have extras? Mine's electronic.
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
take one.
Sure. This is the guideline on laws that were adopted, bills that were adopted. We do not have the RSAs written yet. I think that's correct, right?
As far as where they fall into the book.
Well, one of the impressions I got was we have the bills and we have now the guidelines from the Municipal Association, but until it's cast in the RSA with the exact legal language, it could be tweaked a bit. Is that a misunderstanding?
I don't believe so. The bill should be verbatim how it is as far as formatting goes. That's what we don't get until we actually get the RSA.
Yeah, well,
So they will put in like different citations and things, and if there's case law to support it, anything like that,
okay.
It'll be annotated. But the language that actually controls the whatever the subject is should be how it is.
Terrific. Okay, that's good then. Well, so what you have is the accessory dwelling unit bill, which was, I think, 577, if I'm not mistaken. And this is the NHMA guideline on what's to be done with it. I will also hand out to you the work that Adam had done in doing a red line of our existing bylaw on ADUs and the changes that, at least at this point, that Adam thinks we would need to make. We may need to make others, but this is a work in progress. So there you go. There you go. Yep.
Is that the one that begins accessory dwelling unit?
Yep.
Yes.
It's got crossouts.
Check through Steve.
Steve, you've got yours? Okay.
Do you want me to walk through those?
Yeah. Why don't you go through those?
Okay. So as Peter said, this is quite odd that the bill was signed 15 days after it took effect. I'm not aware of a time when this has happened before, but here we are. So unlike most zoning changes that take effect a year later so that we can update our ordinance and make those changes, we have to operate under a situation where our ordinance just isn't accurate. So what this represents are the pieces of our existing ordinance that I understand to no longer be lawful as it's written. The primary change is the ability to use a conditional use permit. So a conditional use permit is part of the innovative land use controls section of the RSAs that it just basically gives some additional latitude to the planning board within a certain parameter, so they can grant waivers for things that are within this section, whereas other parts of the zoning ordinance, if you can't meet that part of the zoning ordinance, your only relief is to go through the zoning board of adjustment. And so a conditional use permit just kind of blurs the line a bit between what the planning board has control over and the zoning board has control over. But the main difference is it requires a planning board process that functionally looks just like site plan review, which is not terribly onerous, but it is a process. So that is no longer approved as a method. The accessory dwelling units have to be approvable by right through a building permit. And so you'll see this first part here with all the strike through, that all has to do with the conditional use permit, because that part tells us how this is being administered and what information you have to provide us to do the conditional use permit. None of that is applicable anymore. And so then on the next page, you get into where that actually impacts and I'm sorry, I missed it. This is important. In the definition of the ADU, right above where it's the within or attached, that also is struck now because, of course, the primary objective of this bill was to force the approval of detached ADUs. So now it would be a residential living unit that is subordinate, I think we would add there, sorry, I should have put that in, subordinate to a single-family dwelling. And it is neither attached nor detached, it's just another dwelling unit. And so then we have these sort of standards that you had to meet to get your approval, and a lot of them are still allowable, like requiring a separate 911 address, requiring that they must stay under common ownership, that setbacks are met, that one of them can be the primary unit owned by the residential unit of the property owner. These are things we could change. Doesn't mean we can't change them. It just means as far as what went into effect on July 1st, they're fine as they are. So I think we'll assume we want those to stay the same at the moment. The size of the unit, I believe, is still fine for it to be a maximum of 1,000 square feet. The bill still allows for us to control that. Initially, I was not sure if we were, because it all fell under a conditional use permit, are we allowed to even uphold any of the portions of the conditional use permit if the permit itself is no longer allowable. And I believe that we are fine to additionally allow the extra 50 over the 950 that's required by law. So I think we're all set there. The pieces that have to change, we are no longer allowed to require one parking space per bedroom. And this doesn't so much come out of the ADU bill. When we start to go through other amendments, we'll talk more about the parking amendment that was made under a separate bill that requires us to not have anything more strict than one space per unit. And so as this is written, if we had a 2-bedroom ADU, we'd be requiring 2 spaces, and we can't require any residential unit to have more than 1 space now. So that's where there's some crossover here. We can still require that they have parking. We can say that a garage meets that parking if there's not enough driveway space to accommodate the 1 car. What I don't think we can say, so part of the bill says that we can't require anything, any design level guidelines that we don't require of single family homes. And so there's a little bit of question of, is off-street parking within the front yard setback a design guideline? I think it probably is. It's controlling how the look of the apartment is, and we don't have that requirement of a single-family home. If, Nancy wants to park right at the end of her driveway close to Barrett Road, she can do that. And I think we have to allow for that in the accessory dwelling unit. I don't foresee this being something that happens very frequently. I think in the R1, if someone built up to the front yard setback and their garage was at 25 feet, yes, their driveway may only be 25 feet long, and they would be parking in the front yard setback, but we'd allow that. So I think we have to stay even there. Similarly, on the exits that we had required that they face the side or the rear of the property, that's a design standard that we don't require of single family. Now, this was written that way so that when you looked at a house from the street, you really had no idea that it had an apartment in it, that it just looked like a single family. We can't do that anymore. And then similarly with the shall have an interior door connecting the units, there's not that requirement anymore. So we had been fairly lenient with that. I would say that's a spot where the planning board had exercised some of its leverage with the conditional use permit, where some towns required it to go from conditioned living space to conditioned living space. We said, if you can get from one space to the other without going outside, whether that's a staircase into the shared garage that is not heated, and then you can get from the garage into the main house, we were okay with that. That we considered those to be interior. It didn't say conditioned interior, but now none of that is applicable. We just have to potentially be attached, except for we're allowing detached. The funny part is you could write ordinances that were different based on attached versus detached. So they could have had an attached portion of their ordinance that still was going to say they required it. So that's why they went the extra step to say no more saying that you have to be able to go back and forth. If we're going to allow you to have a detached, if you choose to build an attached, it doesn't matter if you can go back and forth. So.
Any questions, comments?
As far as what this means for us, we will take building permits with people's accessory dwelling units. We'll make sure that they meet the standards that are still there. They still have an approved septic system for that. Like always, they don't necessarily have to install that. They just have to show that it's approved should their existing septic fail. It is interesting. I don't know if it's just the media attention around ADUs or if it was really that many people waiting in the wings silently, but it's like we have had a flood of inquiries to do with ADUs.
How many?
Like at least half a dozen inquiries in the last 3 weeks.
Have you given any permits?
We have not given any permits, the exception of we went through a long process with somebody on Shaker Street whose daughter lives away. They are well into their 90s. She wanted to build a detached accessory dwelling unit. We worked with her for more than a year, and she ultimately ended up designing a bunkhouse that just didn't have a kitchen. And so the bunkhouse started construction last week. And so now she is very quickly saying, hey, if I can actually have a kitchen, I still meet all of these other things. So I think we are going to get that building permit like tomorrow. And timing worked out okay for her, so all is well. The other inquiries we've gotten, it's a mix of attached and detached. None of them seem totally aware of the build change. Like they've read an article about it, so they're curious and they ask, but it doesn't seem to be what has driven their interest in it. So I think it could just be happenstance, but it is interesting.
You said it was a mix of both. If I said it was aware, you think there's been people with the detached ones. I could have done that. Yeah, if people were aware and had been thinking about a detached one, you would have thought they would have been coming right in, but.
There's definitely at least one that the ability to have a detached has motivated them to ask. I'm not sure they're as close to execution as some of the others are. I think it's more a concept level at this point. There's another property that is on the market that's unique. The property owner built a barn and put what we would think of as an apartment in the barn, except for it's the only building on the property, so we consider it a single-family dwelling. But the land is valuable enough that it's quite expensive. So everybody that's looking at that property is asking, can I keep the apartment, which right now is not an apartment, but they keep calling it that, and build my full-size house adjacent to it. So that is one we were getting a lot. That unit happens to be over 1,000 square feet because as a single family, they were not stuck. It's only a couple hundred square feet over. So then the question is, can they redesign to meet it, or do they actually go to the zoning board and make a case for a variance of a couple hundred square feet?
Are these all new inquiries or some that are coming up again?
Some coming up again, yeah. Some are new, some from people that I've never met before, so I don't think they necessarily were tuned in to, the housing conversation, but their lives have led them to this being, necessary.
It's just so interesting to me that they voted it down with vehemence, and now here we are. We have no choice. It's here. It's just interesting, and I wonder what all those people are thinking now.
We told them so. So what happens to this now?
So we have to propose some amendment this amendment season. The planning board, we haven't really talked about this yet, and I think honestly they're going to maybe wait to hear how you guys feel about this, because they know you guys have put a lot of effort into housing, and I think they value what your thoughts are and how to move forward, because there's sort of two options, and my recommendation would be we almost break it into two options if you want to tackle anything other than what's required by law. And so we put through a zoning amendment that says these are the things required by law. We've got to change these. We don't have a choice. And then second part of that, if there's anything else that you want to change by choice that could be controversial, that has a chance of not passing, we put that as an independent second amendment. Because we need to come into compliance, and so we can't really risk, if you want to add 100 square feet or whatever you may want to do, we can't really risk yeah.
But how many places can we make, how much flexibility? Just reading through it, there's not a lot of flexibility.
There's not a lot. I think the primary things that
We have to do the things we have to do, and I agree, those should be totally
Right.
separate. Get those passed.
the ones that I think are worth a conversation, but I'm not sure are worth moving forward this year or not without the conversation, are the bedroom limitation and the size. I think those were the most controversial portions of the last go-around. There's a part of me that feels like, okay, let's just get this into effect with what's required. People have more flexibility through the detached. Maybe a few detached units will be built and people will see that it's really not all of that impactful to neighbors. And then if it's in a couple of years, you say, maybe we can add a couple hundred square feet or, whatever it is to let people get comfortable with the changes. But I think that is what we have to talk about.
So that's a decision that's left up to the town, how big they want to allow them to be? Yeah.
Yep.
That's what I thought, but then I thought, oh, really? Maybe not, yeah.
Yep, so it would be the planning board, the selectmen, or 25 voters could make an amendment to change the size.
So that would be optional. That's not a compliance issue, that's
Right.
an optional. Adam, I have a couple things, and this is related to compliance side of this discussion, just to be sure that we are. The laws that we have seen says that one of the dwellings shall be the domicile of the property owner, and we have to show, and there must be adequate evidence. And so I don't know if that's something we need to add, or that's just a standard that's understood. Regarding the off-street parking, isn't it legal for us to require one space per unit?
Per unit, yes.
Wouldn't we want to say that?
We could, yep.
I mean, it would just change from one space per bedroom to one space per unit. I don't have this isn't a big issue, I'm not gonna die on my sword, but I'm always aware of a site that is fairly tight, has a garage or a structure in the back, converted to a detached ADU, and there's not much parking, or the owner and the occupant of the ADU are jockeying for who's in front of whom on a single driveway, and so there ends up being a car parked on the road. And parking on the road is fine, obviously it can't be overnight, but then it becomes sort of a neighborhood issue of a car always parked on the road. So I wouldn't be adverse to just changing it to one space per unit. Then you know the ADU at least has one parking space.
Yep.
But, and that's, again, I see that as compliant.
On the property owner residing on site, I'm not sure that it's something we have to tackle this time around. It is something that I think the longer we have ADUs, we need to talk about. We've lost a couple of ADUs when properties have changed hands, and the next people have to tear them out. I question the likelihood of not being challenged on that when it's a standalone structure. One thing to tell somebody that they have to take out the kitchen and the attached apartment to their house that can now become a family room. But if somebody has a fully independent structure on their property and it sells, or their kids inherit it and their kids don't want to sell it but they're not ready to live here, to tell them that that has to get torn down or a kitchen taken out seems like maybe an overreach that I'm not sure if somebody challenges this in court at some point that it will be upheld. So I do think that's a conversation we have to have at some point. I don't know that it has to be this year, but I think it's something to think about.
There's also, there's a point that was raised when we put forth the detached ADUs for the vote in March 2024 relating to the possibility of somebody building a detached ADU on leased land. And the mandate from the state legislature says we can limit detached ADUs on leased land, and we can also limit or prohibit, that is, condominiumization of the detached ADU, and I think that needs to be in there as well. Specifically, maybe this doesn't need to be stated, but with respect to a pre-existing non-conforming structure, an existing outbuilding that doesn't conform to coverage or setbacks, that the non-conformance can be expanded by making it a detached ADU. In other words, you can't prohibit somebody from converting an existing structure into a detached ADU because it doesn't comply with coverage or setbacks. And
Which is really interesting too, because expansion of use is a well-litigated concept that there's all sorts of other uses we wouldn't allow in a non-conforming structure, including, I think, even single-family, technically. So it's interesting that that's in there, and I think it does show where the long-term legislature, thought process is going on zoning on a whole. But it was interesting.
well, I know specifically one of the comments a resident made at that podium during one of our presentations was somebody could finagle the detached ADU bylaw that we were proposing at the time by ground leasing the land for 99 years, building a detached ADU, and then you've got double density. So I think we should try to get that in there.
It's probably also worth mentioning, because I know this was a hot topic the last time, the law does not give us the ability to control the structure style of the unit, meaning we can't control whether it's a manufactured home or a pre-site built home or a stick-built home. We only have the powers that are clearly articulated in state law. I think where the confusion then came from is that the law says that you can restrict manufactured homes from having an accessory dwelling unit, meaning if you have a manufactured home park of 20 manufactured homes, you can't add on, or you could restrict them from adding on 20 more accessory dwelling units. It doesn't say that you can restrict it from being an accessory dwelling unit. And so I think that there was confusion there. We simply don't have that power. And elsewhere, and I'm sure you've found through this legislative season too, that manufactured homes continued to be supported by the legislature. So it's it's not surprising that they didn't include this in this provision. I don't think it's something that's realistic in London given the land costs. But
So would it be possible then, it would not be possible then, I'm hearing you say, for us to say, under this new bylaw, that we're limiting the geographic reach of manufactured homes?
correct.
Okay, that'll come up, but that's the law.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Well, it's encouraging that already people are excited about that, because we've been hoping this is going to happen for a long time.
Just to share some interest in the one that I think we'll be having the kitchen added into, it's a modular, which is a clear distinction from manufactured home. It's a modular, stick-built in a factory, but delivered in pieces and put together on a full basement foundation. But it's really interesting. It's 700 square feet, I think, and it's a modular company out of Meredith that does very high-end waterfront modulars as well. This is a relatively basic structure. The structure that it's complementing is a 1960s ranch, so it looks like it, probably was built at the same time once it's in place. But it's interesting to see it is a relatively affordable option. I say relatively because if you had to go out and buy the land to put this 720 square foot unit, plus put in a septic and plus put in a well and new driveway and all of that, you'd very quickly get a very expensive 700 square foot house. But for this particular situation, all of that was in place, and this is for a child. I say a child, she's probably, yeah, she's retired herself, but she's coming to take care of her parents. And so it works. The actual cost for the structure, when all of those things are in place, is not outrageous. And so it's really interesting to see this almost as a case study that's going in. It is. You'll never see it because it's so tucked back off of Shaker Street. It's Harold Bucher's house on the airport, on the runway. And so it's tucked off the street and it's tucked off the airstrip. So yeah, so no one will ever know it's there. I'm hoping that once it's done, they'll allow me to come down and take some pictures and, at least show everyone, because I think it is a good example. So.
Questions?
I know this point I'm going to bring up has been discussed in many local towns. Warner went through this considerably for several years. Would a tiny home be sufficient with all of the facilities that are required become an unattached dwelling unit?
So there's no legal
I know
definition.
this was argued before.
Right.
Just wondering.
There's no legal definition of a tiny home. So there's recreational vehicles, which most tiny homes, as we think of them, are actually RVs. And so they're built on a chassis. They're registered in your town clerk's office. They're not taxed as property, unless there is a way for all RVs to actually be taxed as property if you choose not to register them. If you have like a seasonal camper in a campground, there's actually a manner to not do registration, because sometimes registering your $150,000 RV is actually more expensive than the real estate value. But in general, they have a VIN number, they're an RV, and so they're not allowed to be used as a permanent dwelling unit. If they are built to the HUD manufactured home standard, and they're actually certified as a manufactured home, yes, they could be. And then there's also you could stick build a 300 square foot, tiny home structure, which is surprisingly, just anecdotally, I was in Harpswell for the weekend for a wedding, and we rented a little place on the bay. It was 280 square foot, essentially a studio. But it had a full kitchen, living room, queen size bed, nice bathroom, and it was really eye-opening to see what that actually felt like to live in for a few days. Obviously, we didn't have everything for our, life in there, and I probably drove Kristen a little nuts with my tape measure from the car, trying to figure out how, what does this actually feel like to live? But it was eye-opening to see how livable 300 square feet really could be, especially if you were a young single person that, wasn't home much to start with. It was interesting. But I don't think that, on the cottage court and tiny home conversation, I think, even 500 square feet is pretty generous, which left me thinking, I wonder if there's any little units around town that we could almost do field trips or something to, because I think if we're going to get in the weeds of thinking about those things and controlling sizes to try to spur development, none of us live in 300 square feet, I don't think. And so it's hard for us to conceptualize what something like that really is. So if we can try to feel what that's like, I think that would be really valuable. But
Yeah, I drove at the far end of Pleasant Lake in Elkins. There is a group of cottages called Rocky Point Lodges or Rocky Point Cottages. I drove by it and texted Adam the other day, and I said, Adam, is this a cottage court? Could this be considered a cottage court? And I think they're seasonal. I don't think they're,
Yeah.
but I'm sure they're small, just looking at the outside. We could take a look at those as well.
So there's no upper,
Loft, you mean?
no. I'm starting to ask a question that I think I know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So there's no upper limit to a detached, size-wise, to a detached ADU?
we
except by-
we have the 1,000 square feet as the upper
Okay.
limit. There's no
Because
threshold.
earlier you said, well, you could make it 1,050, you can't make it any bigger than 1,000.
No, I think what I said
Maybe
was
I
that the state law requires a minimum of 950.
950,
We've allowed
we've
an
added-
extra.
That's what you did say.
Yep.
Absolutely. So you can't go above.
Yep.
We couldn't make it smaller than 950. We couldn't regulate, say, you have to be at 900. It
Right.
must be 950, but
950.
we've previously set it at 1,000, so we're above the 950 and we're allowed to do.
And the minimum is based on building code for what the, which I think is like 120
And
something
but
square
that's
feet.
New London's 1,000,
Correct.
yeah.
Yep. State law tells us we have to at least allow 950. We've given an additional 50.
So I was just saying, it could change. That
Yep.
could change, that upper, because it's not mandated in the state part of it, so.
And you may remember, we had proposed 1,250
Yeah, there we go, yeah.
and 3 bedrooms, but that's another topic.
So unless there's any other questions on ADUs, I can start to go through the rest of this, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do that, sure.
Okay.
There's another guidance that Adam had forwarded to me from New Hampshire Municipal Association. There are extra copies there.
Oh, sorry.
You have yours?
So the rest of these are not as impactful to us as amendments. There's some impact, but not as significant as ADU. HB 631, this speaks to the requirement of allowing residential development, specifically multifamily, in the commercial. We already allow that. We allow mixed use on one site. We allow 5 units on one site. There is a density minimum, the 5,000 square feet per unit in there. But as far as I'm aware from my reading of this, we're already in compliance with it. The bottom page there, the SB 284, this is the one I was talking about before, sort of falling into the ADU with the requirement of not more than 1 parking space per dwelling unit. So that one's pretty straightforward. I believe that's our only spot that we need to comply in the zoning ordinance, and it's specific to the zoning ordinance. However, I think we can extrapolate that to our site plan review regulations, which do require 2 spaces per residential unit as it stands today. Those are regulations, so the planning board has the ability to waive those. We also have the ability to amend those on a rolling basis through a public hearing process, so they'll move forward and do that. We started to do this spring because this law had changed also last year. We were also out of compliance with that. And then we decided, hey, this bill seems like it's going to go somewhere. Let's just agree if we get any applications between now and the end of the legislative session, we will grant a waiver to accommodate the state law. But let's not go through amending this needlessly if what we're amending it to actually isn't going to stand in 2 months. And so they just sort of put a pause on it. We'll now take care of that. This next one also does impact us a little bit. It's not something that comes into play a lot, but HB 457 controls the number of occupants and their familial relationship. Now, in our definition of family, because in the zoning ordinance, of course, you're defining as many of the commonly used phrases as you can. We use one family, we use two family, so we have to define family, and our definition of family is no more than 5 unrelated occupants. Now, this specifically says that you cannot tie it to their familial connection, their educational status. This was really popular in most college towns. I'm not sure that there's a college town in the state that didn't have something like this on the books. In fact, I'm pretty sure the selectmen went in on a lobbyist with Hanover, Durham, Henniker, all of the college towns to voice opposition to this bill. Honestly, the inquiries we get on this these days are mostly around short-term rentals, and that's happened twice in maybe 5 years. And that's virtually impossible to follow up on. Once you find out about it, those people are gone. They're renting for a week. So it's not a huge change, but we will have to modify our definition. This next one, SB 283, we do not use floor area ratio calculations, so it really doesn't apply to us. But it's saying if you have an ordinance that has a floor area ratio calculation, which honestly Peter can probably explain better than me because it's very popular in Massachusetts, and I imagine he had to calculate it all the time, but that anything in basements or underground parking doesn't calculate into your floor area ratio. And then 282, this is the requirement that you only have to have one stairwell now in a 4-story building, which is interesting.
It's crazy.
It's not something that we have codified in any level of local regulation. It was in state building code. So, obviously state building code applies everywhere. So we'll be bound to this just like everybody else. Presumably this stairwell to meet building code is a fire rated stairwell. That does mean you could have a long building with your only fire rated exit a ways away down a long hallway. As I read it, and I'm not all that versed in state building code because we don't have to enforce it, but there's no square footage maximum. So if you have a 4-story building that's 2,500 square feet on each level, you're still required to have only one staircase, or you could have a 4-story building that's 500 square feet on each level. So effectively, the 500 square feet, no matter what, the staircase is close to you. 2,500, it could be relatively far.
When do you need an elevator?
Elevator typically comes into play at 3 floors, and if your stairwell doesn't meet a certain width. Because like Twin Pines were 2 floors and they didn't have to have an elevator because of their fire rated stairwells met the width minimums. And then if it's a public building, there's different requirements for elevators. So it can be somewhat nuanced.
But this amendment you only need one stairway for four, but do you need an elevator?
Not necessarily, I don't think.
I thought in many cases the requirement for an elevator is for marketing purposes. You've got a 3 or a 4-story building, you can't call that a walk-up. unless you're in a very dense urban environment. So you know, the market demand will tell you you need an elevator. So I don't know about New Hampshire code.
And if it were a mixed-use building and some of the office spaces were on other floors, that can change the classification into it being a public building, which requires different ADA.
Adam, my question on this is, I think I recall correctly that Mark Fougere told us that an existing four-story structure that was converted into residential units, multifamily, would not need to be sprinklered. And so I was
That law
concerned
changed
that,
last year.
I'm concerned there might be a
I think it's
collision of
anything
these
less-
two issues. So you don't have to put in an extra egress stair in, and you don't need to sprinkler it, and that is just if that's true, that's
And it
not-
might even be 5 units or less, doesn't require a sprinkler now. They changed that law last year. I think it's 5 units or less.
I'd be interested in that
Mhm.
conjunction of those two issues, because that's a bad situation.
Can't you have a separate fire ordinance? And we're talking interior here, so you can still have the exterior.
I don't think that you could have a local ordinance that's stronger than this.
City of Manchester does.
I don't think the way this is written that they could.
So we are in compliance on this, are we? Because
Yeah, we don't have
it's a
anything.
building
that-
code issue.
Right, we don't have anything on the books that
Okay.
dictates it now, so we fall to state.
Okay.
Let's see.
Class 6
SB
roads.
281. Oddly, this is the one that's coming up more frequently, and given the fact that we have like half a mile of Class 6 roads, the likelihood of that was very low, but here I am dealing in Class 6 roads. So previously, to build on a Class 6 road, you had to go through a process of having the governing body, which is either your Board of Selectmen, your Board of Aldermen, whatever it is, actually issue the building permits for building on Class 6. Does everyone know what a Class 6 road is?
No,
It's
I-
essentially an unmaintained town road. So we, I think, only really have one Class 6. Well, and oddly, today I had to find a subdivision from 2011 for a house off of Rowell Hill, and the planning board made them in 2011 file a Class 6 road liability waiver at Merrimack County. And so I have Vicky trying to find the waiver to see what I never knew there was anything down there. And the last road agent said we didn't have any, and then the one that Sam and I have been working on for the last 6 months is Pingree, the end of Pingree Road, and then technically the end of Putney. Is Putney? Yeah, Putney's on the top of Morgan Hill, right? Because in theory, Pingree Road used to go all the way up, and Putney and Pingree were one road. And so there's the connector from the end, actually from less than essentially Mark and Allison Vernon's driveway to Morgan Hill is our only Class 6 road portion. There are some lots up there, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4, and one of them I got an inquiry on this week. And so previously you had to go to the select board to get your building permit issued, and the planning board actually had to provide comment on whether or not to grant that building permit. So this changes that process, that it doesn't actually have to go through the governing body. There has to be a waiver of liability that is registered at the county, and you check on that and make sure that it is, and then you can issue the building permit. Charlestown has had a lot of issues with this in the last couple of years. It might be interesting if you Google the Valley News articles on it. You'll see some of them there. But essentially, I think in towns that have, dozens of miles of Class 6 roads, a lot of their available land, so to speak, is on a Class 6 road. And so this is intended to make that process a little bit easier, but it's saying that the property owner is taking over all of the liability for that road. And they also have to prove that they can get insurance. So my understanding, and I need to have this conversation with Chief Lyon, but is that technically speaking, a fire truck they'd be waiving the liability of responding. I don't think that would ever happen. You know, our emergency services are always going to make every effort that they can to get to somebody's house. But technically, this waiver of liability says you're not liable for emergency response, you're not liable for maintenance of the road, all of these things saying, we understand we are not building on a class 4 or better road, we are building on an unmaintained town road, and you don't have any liability. And then they have to prove to us that they have homeowners insurance as well. So that's, in a nutshell, very few possibilities for this to exist in New London, but it does seem like it might come into play. And then, let's see. There were two class 6, so it was 296 and 284, and both of those changes explain those two bills.
I have one question on the second one, though, Adam, because it relates to the planning board's jurisdiction and limitations on private road use for a subdivision. And this could relate to developments in the future in New London. So if, and I'm thinking, you and I have talked, for example, about Slope and Shore, how it has private roads, and those private roads allow the frontage for each one of the parcels. Is it possible now, does the planning board allow private road subdivisions to provide frontage for new lots?
Yep.
Okay.
All new private roads have to be designed and built to town standard. I honestly don't know if the Slope and Shore roads meet the standard. I would guess your street doesn't, that the slope is far greater than we allow
I think
now.
that's right, yeah.
So older subdivisions, obviously, road standards could have been different. What that would do would preclude the private homeowners association from coming to the selectmen to ask them to take over their road. That is somewhat common in development, that it starts as a private road, the developer gets it done, they get it sold, and then they approach the town and ask them to take over the road. We have some funky subdivision setups in New London that I think were done by the planning board in order to make sure that that never was accomplished. Like Great Pines, their lot lines go to the middle of the road, but that area under the road is necessary to meet the minimums that each unit has to meet, so you could never actually take the roads out of the lots without granting variances for every lot in there. So there's some interesting ways of doing that.
Well,
Typically having the roads on a separate deeded parcel, whether maintaining private or with the intention to give it to the town, is best practice. But
My question wasn't so much focused on self-interest of Slope and Shore, but more thinking about subdivisions in the future. If there's a site that a developer comes to the town, and we obviously want to encourage some housing here within limits, is it possible to do that? And the answer is yes. Okay.
And then the last 92, or I guess maybe there's one more on the back too, has to do with recusal of zoning board members. So the law allows for there to be one person that is actually on both planning board and zoning board. I have never worked in a town where that is exercised. It is really, in my opinion, only to be utilized when you are in dire straits of volunteers, and you can't get a quorum for one of the boards, and you have to convince one of your members to sit on 2 boards. Because I'm glad that this is now in law, because in my opinion, by having somebody that's on both boards, you're always creating this difficult situation where they could have expressed an opinion at whichever board met first that could come back to be a bias in whatever board is meeting second. And so this is actually saying if you're a zoning board member and you're on the planning board and you have expressed if you've participated in any previous meeting, you have to recuse yourself. And so the recusal can still count towards a quorum. They don't get to vote. So depending on planning board and zoning boards have different rules as far as that could get messy, but you don't need to necessarily get into that. But it's nice that this is now in state law. And we are lucky to have very good volunteerism, so we're not needing to worry about this at the moment. And then the last portion there, HB 413, this is in relation to execution of approved plans. So when something is approved, the developer essentially, or applicant, gets a time period in which no changes to the zoning ordinance can impact what they've just been approved for. Currently, that's 2 years to make substantial progress, and how do they even? Commences or substantial work is completed within 24 months, and then at the actual completion within 5 years. Now, I think our own history of recent developments tells us that's probably pretty optimistic for projects moving forward in that time period. So they've extended it to 3 years and 7 years, respectively.
Great. Any questions? I don't see those as being issues that we have to grapple with. Certainly the ADU, but it's good to be aware. One of our, just as a reminder, one of our responsibilities is to be fully aware of everything that's happening on housing in our town. So that's just to be informed. Great, thank you, Adam. That's helpful. Next part of the agenda is to talk about what to do with Phase 3 of our HOP grant. We are now entering the third phase in which we're going to be looking at implementing some regulatory change by way of proposals to the planning board with the high hopes that they would adopt our proposal for town meeting vote in March 2026. We had, you may remember, from the second community forum, put together a list of regulatory priorities that we've been working on, and we even set them into 2 tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2, with some thoughts that if we needed to put the Tier 2 list of priorities into March 2027 town meeting, that might be something we could do as a strategy. Does everybody have that list? I've got extras if you want it. It's something we've had for a long time. You got yours. So we have that list, and that list and our concepts to roll forward for 2026 is now a little bit complicated by virtue of this, the regulatory requirements we must make. Adam has just suggested a strategy that makes an awful lot of sense, divide them into what we must do for compliance versus what we hear the community wants us to consider doing for housing as a result of the community outreach we've been doing. So with that in mind, I also sent to you a draft slide deck that Steve Whitman and his team had put together that came out of our last meeting when we said to ourselves, maybe what we want to do is to do our community outreach in small groups and not do it as one big forum as has been our custom, but to reach out to churches and meeting groups and coffee houses or whatever we felt appropriate. What would we take with us? What would be our tool for presentation? It's in rough draft form, and it really is a framework for what could be done. But this is the kind of thing that any one of us could take to our church or our neighborhood or whatever, and make a presentation and answer questions. So we could either do that, or we could propose and plan and execute a third forum, community forum. I would add 2 things to what our scope of this kind of presentation would be, whether it be small or large. One of them is we heard in our community forum number 2, we heard the community that was there in attendance say, gee, these are really interesting concepts, these priorities that we suggested. You remember the profile sheets that we had. These are wonderful ideas, but I'm confused. I don't understand them. So we need to educate ourselves more and the community on what they mean. What is a cottage court? How are clusters executed? All the different profiles that we had so set forth. So education is one, and as part of education is to, when people came at that meeting and they came to us and they asked questions, sometimes the answer was, well, there's an example of that down the street already in New London. And when people are able to use that hook of knowing, having seen an example of it, they immediately understood. So the second part of the education piece is to actually do some pictures, some slides, to show what they look like. Now, if there are examples of it in New London, that would be wonderful, because people would presumably readily know what we're talking about. But if not, we would use photographs from other places to give people a pictographic understanding of what it is that's being discussed. So those are the two pieces of the presentation, whether we do it in small groups or large groups. But a major part of our discussion today is to come up with a strategy. What do we want to do? And one of the discussions, I'll just add one other point, and then I'll look to you, please. Randy Foos had suggested we put together a list of possibilities of places to do our small group discussions. And I started my vacation after that meeting and didn't put together a takeaway list. So I realized just this morning that I had not done that, but we could do that pretty quickly. I can get out to you a draft list of possibilities. You could add to it. Randy certainly would. I would go through the annual town meeting in the back of the book, which shows all the organizations and associations, and sort of handpick from those. But those would be the kinds of places, Rotary or Lions Club, or all the Elkins Fish and Game. Any Tracy Library would hold them for us. They could be very well done, but I think we would need the tools, and it would need to be all of our involvement in putting it together. So let me stop talking and ask for your consideration on whether or not we go with small group meetings or a large forum that we would start putting together in September, October, getting ready for our presentation to the planning board sometime in the end of October.
Peter?
Tom.
I think the small group start is a good way to go, providing that anyone involved in going to those small groups, could it be 2 of us, 3 of us, 1 of us, whatever it is, that we're all going to deliver the same message. I think that's important. And then bring it together later as a large group. So we're basically providing that education early on, but we're going to reinforce it later with a larger group. Hopefully the same people will be involved and come in to lend their thoughts. But just the direction.
One of the benefits of having a slide deck that could be slightly modified to fit the way you deliver things as you think through it, is that it would be the same message, and it would have the same photographs, and so that's the idea.
So how does any sort of discussion relative to new development, new housing, whatever, bump up against the water issue? And where are we with any of that? Because I think it would be hard to have these discussions, because that's immediately what people are going to say. I mean, I think I talk to any.
He's a cute butt.
Yeah, I talk to anybody, and we're all in a holding pattern. So I don't want to go out and try to encourage people to think about something to sell if there's no reality that it can happen.
Well, my answer to that, first of all, is that zoning transcends solutions to water with respect to the water precinct. They are working on it, we're told. I attended the last water precinct meeting. They are not releasing the engineering report because of the lawsuit that's been filed against them by Continuum. We're going to get into some of those details today. But zoning is the kind of long-range planning you have to do that assumes that short-term issues will be resolved, and that's one of them. Another second important point is that the water precinct doesn't provide water to the whole town. So there are properties that have water that's not contaminated that could be pulled out of the ground to serve the building, however many units that may be if we're talking about residential. So that's my answer. Zoning is long-term strategic planning. And you're much better served to do strategic planning on zoning ahead of time than on a reactionary basis, because that's what happens in my career, many scars to show for it. You go to a town to get approvals based on the zoning that they've written, and there's an uproar about how they don't want you to do it, and yet that's the guidelines they laid out allowing it to be done. So it's a reactionary type zoning that they're putting in place versus thinking ahead as we are now, saying this is what we want and this is where we want it. That's the best kind of planning to do. That's my answer. How'd I do?
I think that's accurate. I think it's the question we all want answered, right? But
So when you're going out to the small groups, we're talking about the possibility of the form that, are we talking about the types of buildings?
Mhm.
That seem to come to the surface as preferred? And then what's the planning board? What do we bring to the planning board?
Well, the idea is,
They'll be doing, sorry, I don't mean to
no,
interrupt,
go ahead.
but they'll be doing their own, dealing with the things that have to be done. That won't come from us, and they should be separate. So what are we aiming for with the planning board as a next step?
Our plan, following the HOP grant funding that we requested and we're working with, is to develop some ideas that we would put forth to the community, listen carefully to what we thought their responses would be, and then prioritize them, and then put them into words for further education and eventually a vote. And the step in between is that we could, if we wanted to as a group, file a petition with enough signatures to put our thoughts forward on the ballot without the planning board, but that would be foolish. A better approach for us is to put our thoughts together and present it to the planning board with their concurrence, perhaps some adjustment to meet some of their thinking, so that it would become their items to put on the warrant in March. And that's what happened before, and that's the sort of the best way to go about it, because then you're involving the most knowledgeable people in planning on housing. So we would meet with the planning board, say October or so, maybe early November. We need to set those dates down because there are some deadlines. Promote our ideas to the planning board, have discussions, open public meetings, of course. They would discuss it with us and decide whether they like our ideas or not. We're remembering that we are an advisory group. We don't have any authority but to advise the planning board and the select board.
So our ideas will develop out of these meetings? So we don't know what our ideas, really what we're...
Well, we had our second forum in the cafeteria, as you may remember, at Colby Sawyer. And out of that, we came up with and prioritized the list that we have in front of us.
But I guess what I'm trying to, yes, I understand that.
Okay.
But how does that go, in what shape or recommendation or passage of whatever, does that go to a planning board? I mean, because these aren't, so most of these things are already possible, right? Cottage, maybe not.
cottage, no. Well, cottage is not no. It's just that it's not.
Not particularly defined enough or something?
There's nothing defined enough, but there's also nothing that's incentivizing it that allows you to really provide any chance of it actually happening, right? Because I think sometimes the cottage style, you could go out and do a cluster development.
Mm-hmm.
Our building setbacks, or not building setbacks, the internal setbacks from the cluster might be larger than what a cottage feel requires. I mean, that's something we'd have to look at. But in theory, you could do it But a lot of cottage ordinances give, if you build this way, you can actually have 3 more units or 4 more units or whatever it may be to incentivize someone in that direction. And without that, I'm not sure that it's viable. And so those are the sorts of things that I think are missing from our ordinance to support development style like that. Even though someone could manipulate our existing ordinance into that style, it's just not realistic as written.
So what kind of a, what would, suppose we just took that one idea, what changes to, just because I'm trying to wrap my head around what we're really trying to do, what changes to language in particular existing ones? Or, that's what we'd be proposing, saying that,
I think if we were to take the cluster subdivision regulation and make it into a cottage court regulation, the first thing that we would want to do is eliminate the minimum tract of land being 5 acres for development, if the whole point is to be small and compact. So I think that would have to change. The internal setbacks would need to change. Typically cottage courts are sometimes like 10 feet building separations. They're very compact. We'd probably put something in there that controlled the upper end of the size of the unit, whereas right now that's open-ended. That's left up to the developer, market constraints. Density, adding an incentive of some kind. We eliminated the required to connect to water and sewer. But did that fail with all the rest of them? I didn't bring my zoning ordinance today, so I don't have it in
yeah,
front of
no,
me.
that starts to make sense. I just wasn't quite understanding where we were trying to get, well, and that's just certainly one aspect
Yep.
of the whole thing, but.
Yeah, you're thinking ahead. Each one of these, if we want to put forth the idea, we would eventually ripen into a red line. This is how we would do it. And the red line would either be with language that's new to the bylaw, or whether it's revision of an existing.
Okay.
So if we're having these sort of smaller versus big forum, there has to be sort of a main thing we're getting across to people so that we get something back to come to the planning board with, correct? So I'm just sort of riffing off what Marilyn just said. Using your sort of cheat sheet that you've got here, are we trying to educate, well, there's this kind, this kind, this kind, and with this kind, we would need to do X, and with this kind, we need to do, doesn't that become a lot for people to understand? I don't want to say understand. I'm sure they would get it, but are we going to be in the weeds with people trying to understand the sort of RSAs and the ordinances and what you can do and what you can't do, and how are we going to generate any kind of, hey, yeah, that would be a great idea. Yeah, I think the town would go along and with a change of whatever needs to be done. Am I making my?
And I was just thinking, listening to you talk, I wonder if we're doing it backwards. In other words, we talk about if these were to be done, what changes would need to be made, and then you expose those to the public, and this is what it is. This is, as opposed to this is what it is, and then, I don't know which way is the best way to go.
I just wouldn't want to, just, not that I'm underestimating our town folk, but I wouldn't want people to be like, oh, there's so much work to do, or we have to have so much and such voting. I'm not sure I understand. I'm just saying, if we drill down on one, is that easier? That I don't know, maybe Marilyn has a point. You do it the other way around in order, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very interesting approach. I think that's very interesting. I would add that one of the things that we will be doing anyway, whichever approach we take, Mark Fougere and Steve, we're going to be going through the ordinance our ordinances existing and doing red lines, whether it's for our first tier or a second tier, so that no matter what happens, we have that, we're buying that now for maybe a year or 2 or 3 in the future. We have it as something to work with. So we're going to be acquiring that anyway, if you think that's a good idea. I guess what I heard, and I like your concept, don't get me wrong, what I heard was the community saying, wait a minute, what is a cottage court? Or, what would happen with the cluster subdivision if we reduce the 5-acre limit? These kinds of things. Wait a minute, I don't understand. And in that kind of part of the discussion, whoever is doing the slide deck would say, well, for example, if this subdivision exists today, if that were reduced, it would be this density, or it would have this kind of visibility, or here's a parcel that we know of that could be developed into a cluster if we take these steps going forward. In other words, kind of bring it down to the ground, as opposed to starting with red line. But I think the red line, or the starting with the specific and letting them ask questions, makes some good sense.
You almost have to talk about them together. You almost can't split it into, this is the neat designs and this is how cool it could look and everything, because then the how is so wrapped up right into it. What would we have to, somebody might say, well, so what would we have to do to make this happen? Or.
As far as the small group concept, logistically, how do we see that playing out? I mean, are we just trying to think from an organizational standpoint of, how many do we think that we would be? Would we host them in this room? Would they be?
Well, it reminds me, just a personal story. My first job out of college, I worked for an oil company out of Texas, Mobil Oil, and they sent me, they put me on a speaker circuit, and I guess they figured they're going to send this young guy out into the country and season him a little bit. And they gave me some slides and a projector, and I built my script around it. They told me the message, and it was basically to show people what Mobil did and where they drilled their wells and how clean they kept their sites, and we provide fuel for your homes, et cetera. And so I went to Lions Club and Rotary clubs and church groups, and I'd walk in with my suit and tie and my slide projector and turn it on and be cordial and open and honest and discuss what we're doing. But it was all kind of led by some visuals. So, and it had a rhythm to it that people were comfortable with. And I put some people to sleep, but others learned some things. So that's really what I was thinking.
I do think we have to make sure that if we're making this sort of a housing commission roadshow, we have to be cognizant of meeting laws. So we can't have more than a quorum of the housing commission there. There can't be like subcommittees that are doing this, because subcommittees then have a quorum of the subcommittee, and it all flows down. I think we have to make sure that we're still offering some opportunity that is not connected to any organization, so that nobody can say, well, they didn't come to my whatever group or this group, and I never got an opportunity to participate. So we still have that open dialogue. This is still a public process. And then how we sort of tabulate and report out on the smaller groups, I think we have to be methodical with. I'm not sure, scheduling-wise, how many of them exactly we were planning on. I don't think anybody could probably make all of them, so you're going to end up with like some different interpretations just by its different people in different situations.
What would happen if you ran the presentation 3 times in the same place, 3 different dates?
And make it a larger group, but the same. Yeah.
That's the way to control the message
Yeah.
at one meeting.
Yeah.
But maybe everybody can't come that Wednesday, so we have another one, 10 days away.
I'm still at the place, at the urgency and creating the reason why we need more housing. And the fact that more housing's going to help the town sustain itself via new tax revenues. There's still, I have conversations with people, and just yesterday, a person told me that he was adamantly opposed to that affordable housing up behind Crescenti's, which is, okay, Hannaford's, but it's still Crescenti's to this person, because he doesn't want any Section 8 housing.
Right.
And I said, well, it isn't, and what's Section 8 housing? He had no idea what Section 8 housing is, but there's all these misconceptions about workforce housing, affordable housing, all the types of housing out there. And I think that's still a big obstacle for the town of New London. When we talk about needing housing for the college, for the hospital, and, their existence depends on housing their employees, that doesn't resonate with a lot of people. I think we're still, in the stage of creating urgency, and, this book right here, Peter, that you gave me, and, but there's a statistic, 10,000 people are turning 65 every day. And the book said it's 4 million people over the next 20 years, which is 10,000 people. But that's 10,000 people that are leaving the workforce. New Hampshire's losing younger people. And so what is the housing direction for the town of New London? Is it still going to be a retirement community? But it certainly isn't going to be a retirement community for the middle income type person. So, I don't know where we really are with the housing for the town. And we have yet to sort of talk to developers and ask them their opinion about their ability or capacity to build any kinds of cluster housing in the town of New London. I'm afraid if I get into a smaller meeting, I'm going to be all over the place.
Someone told me the other day, I don't know where this statistic came from, that the largest percentage of people, I'm just going to say it backwards, 65% of the people in New London don't work, don't have jobs, by choice or whatever. And I have no idea where it came from, but that,
Intuitively, I think it's more. I mean,
Yeah.
Adam works. Nancy, I don't
I
know.
work.
Well, you do, I'm sorry, but.
Yeah.
Well, that's all good points, all good points. The controlling the message, tabulating the data, dealing with complex issues and having to explain it thoroughly and effectively in a small group might take a long time, might run in to a number of long sessions in the Rotary Club or wherever. Meanwhile, they need to wrap things up. Yeah. So I hear we're headed towards a larger forum, and maybe multiple large forums.
But maybe smaller, this would be smaller, for instance, than college.
So do it here, you mean? Do it, yeah. Could do that, 3 in a row?
And do 2 or 3 of them. That wouldn't have to be meeting hours at work, you could tell us what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think we do have to be somewhat cognizant that as we head into budget season starting in the next couple of weeks, this room is busy almost every night. It's also just the public has a lot of conflicting opportunities to participate between kids sports in the fall and budget committee on Wednesday and selectmen on Thursday and all of that multiple may be challenging to keep people sort of engaged and or different times or
I was just trying to think it's a little bit
Yep.
smaller, but not the intimate kind of thing where I might say, oh, here's Adam, and I didn't.
I'm wondering what the hook could be. I mean, because I think it's natural that you get a few less people with each iteration. We did have that in the last one, probably 50 people or so less comparatively to the big one, would you say? Because we had about 100 people show up to the morning session. I think we had about 150 at the first one. So I do think there's fatigue as time goes on. And I think there's some just sort of, what can we really do about it right now? I think obviously the issues that are larger than just us in town are making people sort of detach from it and feel a little apathetic. So I do worry a little bit about sort of watering down the audience even further. If we have 3 options and we're really only going to get 50 people, then we end up with 10, 12 people or whatever it may be. That may be a less robust discussion. But that's hard to know. I mean, maybe this actually is making everybody more excited about housing. It sounds like others are feeling similarly that it's not, but it is hard to know going into something like this.
Well, maybe if we do 2 and do them here in the Whipple Hall and do them at different times so that we can hit different.
All these people that don't work can come anytime.
Well, but young families, we know is hard for them at different times. So,
And honestly, after the last 2 and hearing feedback from different people, I'm not sure there's even a time that works for young families. I think you pick a time, and if it's important enough to the people, they'll figure out a way to make it work. Because we did 2 totally different approaches, and I heard from different people last time with young kids, totally different reasons why they couldn't go to either. So I think we're sort of just stuck. That's a hard time in life to make public meetings, but
And it's really hard because I think some of those people would be more involved if they could, even if it was hard.
yep.
I mean, they want to be, some of them.
okay, well, that sounds, I can map that out with Adam and get back to you, and we'll come up with what that would look like. And talk with the consultants as well. This draft of a slide deck was really just to kind of bring along our thinking. It wasn't to cast anything in stone. So, that we can put that aside. I think it'd be helpful then quickly to go through this priority list and start to hone this down if we think it should, because what we'll be doing is presenting things in the first tier, unless we want to change that. And now that we know about the ADU stuff that has to get done, in an environment where there will be other things, maybe we should simplify this list. You got to go? Okay. All right, great. Thank you. We heard, at least I heard the community say that cottage courts were something they'd like to see. That was high, and clusters seemed to be pretty firm. But please, speak up if you had a different sense of it.
No, I agree with that.
I think the institutional districts from the institutions is high priority. I don't really have a concept on what the public perception of that is, but
No, I think so too.
it doesn't seem like something to me that the public would generally have concern with. I think for the most part, they're supported institutions.
I have a personal preference for the existing home conversions, because thinking as a real estate person, I think of square footage of buildings, and the retiring population that is looking to downsize means that you've got all these big square footage blocks that will become available as the smaller units become available. And when they move into the smaller units, what do you do with the large properties to make them smaller and multiple? So I'd sort of like to see that, but again, I don't want to push a rope, and I certainly don't want to push something that's going to make the rest of it unpopular.
But that makes a lot of sense. So how do you put that to action?
Well, as suggested here, you allow by special permit, multiple units in a conversion building. Up to 4 units. Take a,
But then how do you get that message out there, that this town's welcoming to that type of housing?
that sounds welcoming. How could it be done?
Does that, do the Board of Select people take that up as a philosophical trait for this town? I'm getting way ahead of myself, but, the zoning's in place, there's an enabling environment. How do you get the leadership of the town to get behind that?
How do we know they even agree with it?
Well, they don't. But that, we're an advisory committee
Right.
circulating ideas. But the biggest step to me is getting, the town leadership of the town having a concentrated philosophy on what should be done and how it should be done.
Well, it became, let's just talk about existing home conversions, for example,
Yeah.
up to 4 units. You take a big house. When I wandered around with my camera with a zoom lens and took pictures, and some of we used, I went around looking for existing structures that could become multifamily. And I found a number of them, particularly some of the older ones with a, what do you call it, front house, back house, barn? What's the,
Big house, little house, back house, barn.
and in a number of cases, I took a picture of this and I said, I don't know who owns it or what, or whether it's a 1 unit or a 2 unit or what its use is, but this could be converted into 4 units very easily with ground floor entrances. Each building, if you will, though it's attached, has its own character. Obviously, the fenestration has to be changed a little bit, and you have to be up to code and more heating systems, et cetera. But architecturally, aesthetically, and functionally, it would make a lot of sense. So the answer I have is, I can pull out some of those pictures and show you houses, existing properties that could be converted pretty from a functional standpoint.
But then you have to find the developer, the person who's able to do it.
Yeah.
One of the pictures that you show is the blue house on the corner of Pressy and
Yeah.
Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
And for years, that was Don Clark, the doctor. Well, before that was a funeral home. And then Don bought it, and it was a single-family residence. And then he let it go, and somebody bought it, and it was a 4-unit, 5-unit apartment house. And it was in disrepair for a number of years. And the current owner came in and fixed it up, but over time. But there wasn't a concentrated effort, or, nobody from the town approached the developer to come in and do that. And I guess that's where I'm at. How do we attract the right developer to come in and actualize your plan?
Well, you first have to make it possible,
Right, yeah, okay.
and then you have to get out and make sure that it's well-known. And we can do that through workshops, we can do that through articles in the paper, through meetings with the Housing Commission, invite developers. But we got to make the change first. And that's, I think, the way we have to go about it.
Were there any special exceptions for the blue house?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, obviously, when it was the yellow house, that those units were in place when I got here, so I didn't ever work with those owners. These owners, they've just cosmetically updated the units. And I do think there's a group of people that are interested in completing those kinds of developments, and I do think they stay somewhat aware of what the markets they're interested in, where the opportunities are. And we get calls from time to time asking us questions, and you can tell that it's somebody that's looking for an investment property. So I think it does happen somewhat organically. I do think in larger communities, they'll have a community development officer or somebody that does do economic development and housing development, in a more business way than just regulatory way, going out and trying to attract developers. And
I have a question. When we're talking about the existing home conversions, are we talking about, I kind of got lost here. I thought we were talking about one house originally, but it appears to be that there may be multiple buildings on one lot. Is that possible? Or are we concentrating on one large building and working within that?
Well, the example I was using was these old farmhouses. that had a main house and then a kind of a back house, a wing that was added on perhaps later. And then there was a barn that was attached to that later, or maybe, enhanced over time. In other words, it has these different sections to it. I've even seen new houses built architecturally where they change the color of the wings to make them look like it's an old farmhouse, right? Different style, different siding, et cetera. So the notion of this zoning change would be existing structures. I was only using one example of these old farmhouses.
If there were, let's say, 3 structures, a large house, maybe a small one, and maybe a barn. If they were to be converted into, well, 2 of them fixed up and made into homes, how does that work out as the property?
How does it what, Tom? How does it?
Who owns the property?
It depends. I mean, it could be a condo, it could be that one person's renting out the other units. Downtown Woodstock, Vermont, I'm sure you've seen these on many corners and you just don't realize it because aesthetically they still look exactly like the single-family mansion that they were when they were built in 1850. But in a lot of cases, they're actually 4 or 5 unit condo developments.
Okay.
So it's certainly something that's utilized in a lot of towns similar to New London that have big old houses. I do think it's one we'd have to be careful how we educated the community on it, because I think it could create some angst out of the gate, and especially if it was in a more rural area of town where there are some larger old historic farmhouses, that could create some discomfort to people. But I think if this is something you want to pursue, we have to have those conversations of where is it that you want to allow this first of all, because maybe it's not everywhere in town, maybe it is, but maybe that waylays some of the fears from the outskirts, so to speak. But then also talk about design review and things along with it that might bring people some. And I'm not talking townwide design review specific to this, that might bring people some comfort too.
Across from the Barn Playhouse, the old gatehouse,
Mm-hmm.
it's got 5 condos on it. Or 4? I think it's 5.
It's at least 5. It might even be 6.
Yeah, so I mean.
And the old hospital.
That's a good example of taking Benita Gay lived there with a 1 tenant, and now there's up to 6 condos, probably with a $300,000 value. An old house on Main Street.
Well, in the old hospital building,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, bingo, yeah,
how many units are in there?
8, I think.
That's condo, right?
yeah.
I think there's 8 total. Legally,
how
it
did-
says there's 7, and then there's a 7A and a 7B.
That's next to your blue house there.
Yeah, exactly.
But how did that happen?
Zoning was different when they were subdivided.
Right, but
But
I'm going to where you were before.
Bud's mother-in-law, Benita Gay, owned it. Bud received the building, and then he converted it. It was organic.
Okay,
Bud,
so it was
you know,
it was organic, and it was,
But Bud was a quasi-developer,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't any strategic,
no.
systemic kind of reason for it. It was one person who had some money and got it done.
And because it was possible, he
Yeah.
decided to do that.
Well, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe we need to capitalize on the organic stories that have occurred. To show people that you don't, not that we wouldn't need a developer, perhaps, but that you're showing people how these things get done. They get done because the zoning was different at one point. So when zoning changes, this allows for blah, blah, blah. That, I don't know, I'm just,
Actually, you start up at the head of Main Street, where Main hits Newport, and go right down the street. And virtually, I don't know, almost every
everyone has
building's been
changed.
renovated
Yeah, everyone is,
within the last 20 years.
I mean, maybe it's just a historical,
Maybe
using
Maybe
them
the
as
town's
examples,
doing-
right?
maybe the town is doing what we would like them to do.
But we're
I
not.
mean, when you really look at Main Street, Gott's building, the orange building.
But they're all onesie-twosie, right? It's always organic.
Yeah.
Somebody buys a building, they decide to do something,
Lemon Tree Shop,
and lemon twist, whatever, yeah.
the Montessori school is going to be coming in. Bank's going to renovate their building. Well, renovate.
I'm not saying I know where all those stories come from, but I don't know, is it that you look back at what the planning board decided, or, I don't know, but all these buildings got done, and so I feel like we're in a situation where we want to say, so who will do it with the next building, right? Rather than saying, this building let's find somebody.
It's all new capital, and there's no big conglomerates doing it, it's individual people.
I do think right now we're in a weird spot in the construction market
Yeah.
where renovation is much more difficult than new construction, and new construction is expensive as it is.
Right.
And so that makes some of the conversions a harder sell.
So is it like we go to somebody like Twin Pines and say, so how are you accomplishing what you're accomplishing? How can, they're taking some buildings
they
in
are,
Vermont and wherever the hell they're taking them. And
Although their model has changed in the last few years, I would say that they are not doing as much conversion and renovation as they once were. It's a lot of new construction. And certainly Andrew would be the better one to answer this, but I think a lot of it has to do with energy efficiency and the cost to retrofit and meet current codes. And so when they are trying to build buildings that are as maybe not LEED certified, but as close to LEED certified as they can, that's really hard to do in a renovation, or can be, depending on the structure.
So where are we at this point? I'm going to need to wrap.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, we're past our time frame. We have so far decided that we're going to hold more than one event in some sort of repetitive basis in places that are in between small and very large forums. Tell me if this doesn't sound right to you. I hear that we are contemplating doing 2 or so in a row, perhaps, for example, in this room, that we would have examples of the things that we're considering promoting. We have talked about the fact that we really don't need to touch the ADU issue for now, because that will sail on its own by state mandate. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other concepts in our first tier that we have come to think are good ideas to put forth. We haven't discussed much the 2-family structure idea. We can get to that again at our next meeting, but we've refined down to cottage court, existing home conversion, cluster subdivision, and institutional districts as being sort of the key topics.
So
Does that
those
sound right?
topics, those proposals would be something that then we would refine and bring to the select board and the planning board.
Yes,
Okay.
so far, that's our target.
So I'm just thinking we might not want to put effort into more than one meeting. I think that, the fact that every meeting we get smaller, that we build this up as much as possible and we get at least a core there. Because I could see us at a second meeting sitting there twiddling our thumbs and looking at each other. So I think one meeting that we, advertise well, be real clear as to what we're looking to do, what we're looking to get out of it, and how we're going to move that forward, and we go with that. That's my recommendation. Because I think it's also the way to control the message. Because if we have too many people, it just gets...
I think when you were on the select board still, when we did that, remember we did like a Wednesday night and a Saturday morning of that. And well, I remember too that the conversation that did happen, it went down 2 totally different avenues in the 2. And so then when we're done, it was like, it was all good information, but you didn't really get the same information from the different people. And so it was hard to figure out what the consensus was.
Okay? So here's what I'd recommend. Would you be willing to meet again on August 27th? I haven't cleared this with Adam. I just looked at my own calendar to try and get something out there.
I won't be here that week.
You won't be here? Okay. Let's find a time. We can ripen this idea, and I also, at the same time, Adam, I thought it'd be helpful if you would, hopefully by then, have a schedule for us as to what dates we need to hit to be at certain points to deliver to and meet with the planning board. You know the routine.
Yep,
If you could, if you have the time, could map that out for us.
yep.
Thank you. Well, Adam's not gonna, couldn't make it, so let's find a time.
I am.
Uh, Next week? That's quick, but. Yep. The 19th? I don't know if the room's available or.
I can.
You can?
If we're doing 2:30, I can.
How about 5:30, the 19th? Yeah, that's next Tuesday. Because the following week, Adam's out, and then we're into the week after Labor Day.
I don't think I can do 5:30 that night. I could do like 3:30, but I need to be gone by 5.
Well, that's an hour and a half is fine.
Does 3:30 work for you, Amy? Or no? What about the 20th? I have to be at a selectmen's meeting at 5:30.
I can do the 20th. I can do the 2:30,
2:30?
if that works for everyone.
Tom, you could do that? That sound good, Steve? How about the room? Do we-
Doesn't look like there's anything on here until the selectmen are at 5:30. But I'll have to get back and look at it's a paper calendar still, so.
Okay,
And we're doing it here?
yes. So far. So 20th, tentatively the 20th at 2:30. Okay. Well, I just think we need to shape this. I also want to go over, I sent you the information on Twin Pines, the lawsuit from Continuum, and that all is what it is, speaks for itself. But if you have any questions, we can go over those then. I don't have all the answers, but we can talk about it.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Adam, is it true you're being sued personally?
Yes.
Oh, you're indemnified, so you
I
don't.
can't really talk about
But
it.
you must be indemnified. Okay, never mind, sorry. Well, that's too bad. You need that like a home head. Sorry.
So we're going to pass the hat and make sure you got it.
The Primex attorneys will be covering it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Good meeting.